My schedule had not been normal from Wednesdays, so was
Oh yeah.
yeah, so a little bit hectic. Anyway, uh, Tolstoy's book. We were in the third class history. That's where we were, am I right? So
Yeah, we read through all that.
where we were then? We were in chapter. Which chapter now?
Uh, Mine doesn't give chapters, but the beginning of the paragraph, or in your case, the chapter that we're in, is it says a locomotive is moving.
Man, what?
He's about to give an example after he expounded on the three different
Oh
kinds
yeah,
of
chapter
impermanence.
three. Chapter three. Sorry.
Chapter three. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna read. Okay, so today I'm in the reading mode.
Okay.
Indulge me. Ha. Okay. Chapter three. I don't understand when you read. I have a hard time to catch up understanding, and it's English. The writing here is like be take a little time to understand it. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah.
So read it so I can understand. Okay. So yeah. Chapter three. Again, this is War and Peace is epilogue, second epilogue by Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 3, a locomotive is moving. Someone asks, what moves it? A peasant says the devil moves it. Another man says the locomotive moves because wheels go round. A third asserts that the cause of its movement lies in the smoke, which the wind carries away. Reminding me the story, the blind man tried to figure out
Yeah.
what the elephant looked like. Is that right?
Yeah.
Reminding you that one or not? Just
It
hold on.
is. Yeah.
I'm gonna move my location a little bit. Okay, so see it
Okay.
more comfortably. Can you still hear me well? Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Locomotive. That's right. The peasant is irrefutable. He had devised a complete explanation to refute him. Someone would have to prove to him that there is no devil. Or another peasant would have to explain to him that it's not the devil but a German who moves the locomotive. Only then, as a result of the contradiction, will they see that they are both wrong. But the man who says that the movement of wheels is the cause refutes himself, or having once begun to analyze, he sought to go on and explain further why the wheels go round until he has reached the ultimate cause of the movement of the locomotive in the pressure of steam in the boiler. He has no right to stop in his search for the cause. The man who explained the movements of the locomotive by the smoke that it carried back had noticed that the wheels do not apply explanation, and had taken the first sign that occurred to him, and in his turn has offered that as explanation. The only conception that can explain the movement of the locomotive is that of a force commemorate with the movement observed. Well, he's pretty verbose. I'll use the word wrong. And anyway, he tried to get the point. I was reading this is a parable about paying different worker with different wages, the same wage, stuff like that. I thought, man, if I hear that story, I pretty much becoming impatient. It was a long story. I mean, so
I thought the same thing. Yeah.
he got in every detail. So 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Okay, I got the point. Can you move on? We are so smart. The only conception, I'm sorry. The only conception that I can explain the movement of the people is that some force consummate with the whole movement of the peoples. And to supply this conception, various historians take forces of different kinds, of which are incommensurate with the movement observed. Some see it as a force directly inherent in heroes, as a pleasant sees the devil in the locomotive, others as a force resulting from several other forces, like the movement of the wheels. Others again as intellectual inference, like the smoke that are blown away. That's a very, very good parable, right?
Yeah.
So long as the histories are written of separate individuals, whether Caesars, Alexanders, Luthers, or Voltaires, and not the histories of all, absolutely all those who take part in the event, it is quite impossible to describe the movement of humanity without the conception of a force compelling men to direct their activity towards a certain end. I think Tolstoy challenges this perception basically in the end of the day. I'm not sure, okay, so yeah, I was through comments here and there, so just maybe totally wrong. Just bear with me. Okay, so
Well, what he's doing
uh-huh.
in all of these three, he's saying they all, regardless of their differences, they're all admitting a force that they can't describe.
Yeah.
And therefore they're not satisfactory explanations of history.
I got you. Yeah, got you. Yeah. I think I got you. And the only such conception knows history is that of power. This conception is one handle by means of which the material of history as at its present expounded can be dealt with. And anyone who breaks down a handle off, as Buckle did without finding some other method of treating historical material, merely deprived himself of the one possible way of dealing with it. The necessity of the conception of power as explanation of historical events is best demonstrated by the universal historians and historians of culture themselves. For they professedly reject that conception, but inevitably have recourse to it at every step. In dealing with humanity inquiry, the science of history up to now is like money in circulation, paper money and coin. The biographies, the special national histories are like a paper money. They can be used and can circulate to fulfill the purpose without harm to anyone, and even advantageously as long as no one asks what is the security behind them. We need only forget to ask what the will of heroes produces events, and such histories as theirs will be interesting and instructive and may perhaps even possess a tinge of poetry. But just as doubts of the real value of paper money arise either because being easy to make, too much of it gets made, or because people try to exchange it for gold, so also doubts concerning the real value of such histories arise either because too many of them are written, or because in his simplicity of heart someone inquires, by what force did Napoleon do this? That is, wants to exchange the current paper money for the real gold of actual comprehension. The writer of universal histories and of the history of culture are like people who recognize the effects of paper money, decide to substitute it for money made of a metal that was not the specific gravity for gold. It may indeed making juggling coin, but will do no more than that. Paper money may deceive the ignorant, but nobody is deceived by tokens of a base metal that has no value but merely jingle. As good is good, and if it is serviceable, not merely for exchange, but also for use. So universal historians will be valuable only when they can reply to history's essential question, what is power? The universal historians give a contradictory reply to that question, while the historians of a culture invade it and answer something quite different. It is counters of imitation. Good can be used only among a group of people who agree to accept them as good, or among those who do not know the nature of good. So universal historians and historians of culture, not answering humanity's essential question, serve as currency for some purposes of their own, only in universities and among mass readers who have a taste for what they call serious reading. It's a word sarcastic. Sorry. It's good criticism of such historians. Well, I guess I'm gonna read on. Okay, so yeah.
Okay.
That's not bothering you, so.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm joking. Chapter 4. Having abandoned the conception of associations as to the divine subjection of the will of a nation to some chosen man, the subjection of that man's will to the deity, history cannot, without contradictions, take a single step till it has chosen one lawful two things, either a return to the former belief in the direct intervention of the deity in human affairs, or a definite explanation of the meaning of the force producing historical events, and termed power. A return to the first is impossible. The belief has been destroyed. So it is essential to explain what is meant by power. Napoleon ordered the army to be raised to go to war. We're so accustomed to that idea and have become so used to it that the question, why did the 600,000 men go to fight when Napoleon uttered certain words, seemed to us senseless in the power, and so what he ordered was done? This reply is quite satisfactory if we believe that the power was given him by God. But as soon as we do not admit that, it becomes essential to determine what is this power of one man over others. It cannot be the direct physical power of a strong man or a weak one, a domination based on the application or threat of physical force, like the powerful Hercules. Nor can it be based on the effect of a moral force, that is, in their simplicity. Some historians think who said that the leading figures in history are heroes, that is, men gifted with a special strength of soul and mind called genius. This power cannot be based on the predominance of moral strength, or not to mention heroes such as Napoleon, about whose moral qualities opinions differ widely. History shows us that neither Louis XI or Metternich, who ruled over millions of people, had any particular moral quality, but on the contrary were generally morally weaker than any of the millions they ruled over. If the source of power lies neither in the physical nor in the moral quality of him who possesses it, it must evidently be looked for elsewhere in the relation to the people of the man who wields the power. And that is how power is understood by the science of jurisprudence. That's interesting. That's actually biblical. Biblical understanding power, okay? The power of the ages to come. Do you think that's supernatural working power? Or a judicial prudence, So
Right.
I'm just talking. So judicial prudence is based on the law, but it's just defining a relationship, am I right? Anti with a relational dynamic. Making sense to you? So
Right.
Anyway. That's very insightful for Tolstoy, He's a true thinker. That exchange that's the exchange back of history, which offer to exchange history's understanding power for true gold. Power is the collective will of the people transferred by express or tacit consent to their chosen rulers. In the domain of jurisprudence, which consists of discussions of how the state of power might be arranged where it is possible for all that is to be arranged, it is all very clear, but when applied to history, that definition of power needs explanation. The science of jurisprudence regards the state of power as the ancients regard fire, namely, as something existing absolutely. But for history, the state of power are merely phenomena, just as for modern physics of fire is not an element but a phenomenon. From this fundamental difference between the view held by history and that held by jurisprudence, it follows that jurisprudence can tell minutely how its opinion power should be constituted and what power existing immutably outside time is. But the history questions about the meaning of the mutations of power in time, it can answer nothing. If the power be the collective will of the people, transferred to the ruler as Pugachev, a representative of the will of the people? Was Pugachev a representative of the will of the people? If not, then why wasn't Napoleon the first? Why wasn't Napoleon III a criminal when he was taken prisoner and Boulogne? What? Boulogne? How to say that word?
I'm not sure.
Boulogne, okay. And why? Later on, were those criminals whom he arrested. 2 palace revolutions in which sometimes only 2 or 3 people take part, transfer the will of the people to a new ruler. In international relations, is the will of the people to transfer to the conqueror? Will the will of the Confederation of the Rhine transfer to Napoleon in 1806? Will the will of the Russian people transfer to Napoleon in 1809 when our army, in alliance with the French, went to fight the Austrians? To these questions, 3 answers are possible. Either to assume, 1, that the will of the people is always unconditional transfer to the ruler or rulers they have chosen, and that therefore were every emergence of a new power, every struggle against a power once appointed, should be absolutely regarded as an infringement of the real power. Or 2, that the will of the people is transferred to the rulers conditionally, under definite and known conditions, and to show that all limitation, conflicts, even destructions of power result from a non-observance by the rulers of conditions under which the power was entrusted to them. All 3, that the will of the people is delegated to the ruler conditionally, but then the conditions are unknown, are indefinite, and that the appearances of several authorities or struggles or falls results solely from the greater or lesser fulfillment by the ruler of those unknown conditions on which the will of the people is transferred from some people to others. And these are the 3 ways in which the historians do explain the relation of the people to the rulers. Some historians, those biographical and specialist historians, already refer to, in the simplicity of failing to understand the question of the meaning of power, seem to consider that the collective will of the people is unconditionally transferred to historical persons, and therefore, when describing some single state, they assume that particular power to be the one absolute and real power, and then any other force opposing this is not the power, not a power, but a violation of power, mere violence. Their theory, suitable for primitive and peaceful periods of history, had the inconvenience in application to complex and storm periods in the life of nations during which various powers arise simultaneously and struggle with one another. That a legitimist history will prove that the National Convention, the Directory, the Bonaparte were mere infringers of the true power, while a Republican and the Bonapartists will prove, the one that the Convention and the others, that the empire was a real power and that all the others were violations of power. Evidently, the explanation furnished by these historians, being mutually contradictory, can only satisfy young children. Recognizing the falsity of this wheel of history, another set of historians say that the power rests on a conditional delegation of the will of the people to the rulers, and that the historical leaders have power unconditionally on carrying out the program that the will of the people has by tacit agreement prescribed to them. But what this program consists in, these historians do not say, or if they do, they continually contradict one another. Each historian, according to his view of what constitutes the nation's progress, look for these conditions in the greatness, wealth, freedom, or enlightenment of citizens, of France, or some other country. Not to mention the historian's contradictions as to the nature of this program, or even admitting that one general program of this condition exists. The facts of history almost always contradict that theory. If the conditions under which power is entrusted consist in the wealth, freedom, and enlightenment of the people, how is it that Louis XIV, the Ivan the Terrible, and the reigns tranquilly, while Louis XV, Charles I, are executed by the people? To this question, historians reply that Louis XIV's activity considered the program react on Louis XIV. 15th. Yeah? 16th. Oh, okay. That's okay. But why did it not react on Louis XIV or on Louis XV? Why should it react just on Louis XVI? That's strange questioning. Sorry. I understand. I'm trying to get it. Now, what is the time limit for such reactions? To these questions there are and there can be no answers. Equally, little does this view explain why, for several centuries, the collective will is not withdrawn from certain rulers and the heirs, and then suddenly, during a period of 50 years, it transferred to the Convention, to the Directory, to Napoleon, to Alexander, to Louis XVIII, to Napoleon again, to Charles the 10th. Wow, Charles the 10th. To Louis Philip, to a Republican government, and Napoleon III. When explaining this rapid transfers of the people's will from one individual to another, especially in view of international relations, conquests, alliances, the historians are obliged to admit that some of these transfers are not normal delegations of the people's will, but accidents depend on cunning, on mistakes, on craft, or on the weaknesses of a diplomatist, a ruler, or a party leader. So then the great part of the events of history, civil wars, revolutions, and conquests are presented by this history not as results of a free transference of the people's will, but as results of the yield-directed will of one or more individuals. That is once again as usurpations of power. And so these historians also see and admit historical events which are exceptions to the theory. These historians resemble a botanist who have noticed that some plants grew from seeds producing two cotyledons. Should insist that all that grows does so by sprouting into two leaves. And then the palm, the mushroom, and even the oak, which blossom into full growth and no longer resemble two leaves, are deviations from the theory. Can you read on? So,
Sure. Historians of the third class assume that the will of the people is transferred to historic personages conditionally, but that the conditions are unknown to us. They say that historical personages have power only because they fulfill the will of the people which has been delegated to them. But in that case, if the force that moves nations lies not in the historic leaders, but in the nations themselves, what significance have those leaders? The leaders, these historians tell us, express the will of the people. The activity of the leaders represents the activity of the people. But in that case, the question arises whether all the activity of the leaders serves as an expression of the people's will, or only some part of it. If the whole activity of the leaders serves as the expression of the people's will, as some historians suppose, then all the details of the court scandals contained in the biographies of a Napoleon or a Catherine serve to express the life of the nation, which is evident nonsense. But if it is only some particular side of the activity of an historical leader which serves to express the people's life, as other so-called philosophical historians believe, then to determine which side of the activity of a leader expresses the nation's life, we have first of all to know in what the nation's life consists. Met by this difficulty, historians of that class devise some most obscure, impalpable, and general abstraction which can cover all conceivable occurrences, and declare this abstraction to be the aim of humanity's movement. The most usual generalizations adopted by almost all the historians are freedom, equality, enlightenment, progress, civilization, and culture.
Can you repeat the list? Can you repeat the list?
Sure. The most usual generalizations adopted by almost all the historians are freedom,
equality,
enlightenment,
progress,
civilization, and
culture. 6 of them. Okay.
Yep. Postulating some generalization as the goal of the movement of humanity, the historians study the men of whom the greatest number of monuments have remained: kings, ministers, generals, authors, reformers, popes, and journalists, to the extent to which, in their opinion, these persons have promoted or hindered that abstraction. But as it is in no way proved that the aim of humanity does consist in freedom, equality, enlightenment, or civilization, and as the connection of the people with the rulers and enlighteners of humanity is only based on the arbitrary assumption that the collective will of the people is always transferred to the men whom we have noticed, it happens that the activity of the millions who migrate, burn houses, abandon agriculture, and destroy one another never is expressed in the account of the activity of some dozen people who do not burn houses, practice agriculture, or slay their fellow creatures. History proves this at every turn. It is the ferment of the peoples of the West at the end of the 18th century and their drive eastward, explained by the activity of Louis XIV, XV, and XVI, their mistresses and ministers, and by the lives of Napoleon, Rousseau, Diderot, Beaumarchais, and others. Oh, sorry, that was a question. I wasn't reading it as one, but
that's okay. I understand. Yeah.
Is the movement of the Russian people eastward to Kazan and Siberia expressed by details of the morbid character of Ivan the Terrible and by his correspondence with
Ivan the Terrible. They call him Ivan the Terrible. Can't believe that. He was a very cruel man. So. And rough.
Yeah. It gives a little footnote here about that. It says,
go ahead.
Prince Andrei Kurbsky was one of Ivan the Terrible's principal boyars. He escaped into Lithuania I don't know if that's how you say that, to make a political protest, and from there wrote harsh letters to Ivan, reproaching him for his cruelty, untruthfulness, and despotism. Ivan replied with equal harshness, developing a theory of autocratic power and the duty of Slavish submission to it, according to the law of God.
It's were a foolish application of that idea, even in this. Yeah. Go ahead.
Continues.
I mean, those more than morbid. It's a wicked character. Really, is wicked. They never think about God want righteous rulers, not for their own gain. That's the whole Bible is about. You know, it's ridiculous. It's like these people reading the Bible only think about how to benefit themselves. You know, so.
Yeah. Well, they think that benefiting of themselves is God's will.
Can you believe that? That kind of theory ruled the nations through the long period of time in different...
Many times and in all sorts of different cultures.
Ah, yeah. Sad, huh? Thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's a failure of the church for sure. Those so-called Christian nations.
Yep.
Go ahead.
It says here, is the movement of the peoples at the time of the Crusades explained by the life and activity of the Godfreys and the Louises and their ladies? For us, that movement of the peoples from west to east, without leaders, with a crowd of vagrants, and with Peter the hermit, remains incomprehensible. And yet more incomprehensible is the cessation of that movement when a rational and sacred aim for the crusade, the deliverance of Jerusalem, had been clearly defined by historic leaders. Popes, kings, and knights incited the peoples to free the Holy Land. But the people did not go, for the unknown cause which had previously impelled them to go no longer existed. The history of the Godfreys and the Menissingers, they have a note on the Menissingers, and it says here, Godfrey of Bouillon was a leader of the First Crusade at the end of the 11th century. Peter the Hermit was an ascetic French monk who tradition says inspired the First Crusade. The Menissingers were wandering minstrels, often of knightly rank, who in the 12th and 13th centuries went about singing love lyrics as well as the crusading song, chiefly in Swabia and Austria. So back to that sentence. The history of the Godfreys and the Menissingers can evidently not cover the life of the peoples. And the history of the Godfreys and the Menissingers has remained the history of the Godfreys and the Menissingers, but the history of the life of the peoples and their impulses has remained unknown. Still less does the history of authors and reformers explain to us the life of the peoples. The history of culture explains to us the impulses and conditions of life and thought of a writer or a reformer.
Again, here, for my own clarity, and Yin Liu was what he shared. Culture here in Tolstoy's idea basically intellectual, am I? People intellectual mind in a sense, am I? So go ahead.
Yeah, I remember we mentioned that last time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's see.
We learned that Luther.
We learned that Luther had a hot temper and said such and such things. We learned that Rousseau was suspicious and wrote such and such books. But we do not learn why after the Reformation the peoples massacred one another, nor why during the French Revolution they guillotined one another.
Guillotine! That's terrible, huh? This is terrible time, you know? Can you believe that? They do that?
Right.
Yeah. Man, sorry. Can you imagine? I can't imagine people do that, you know? So,
yeah. If we unite both these kinds of history, as is done by the newest historians, we shall have a history of monarchs and writers, but not the history of the life of the peoples.
Man, terrible.
You want to read this next part?
Yeah. I mean, we can move on as long as we can. So
me too.
let me see. Yeah, we can finish that part. Yeah.
It's not long. Yeah.
Let me read. Okay. So sorry. Yeah. Chapter 5 now. If I don't, I listen to you for longer. I lost my attention. Sorry.
Yep.
I try to catch up, but I can't. So, yeah. The lives of nations is not contained in the lives of a few men. For the connection between these men and nations has not been found. The theory that this connection is based on the transference of the collective will of a people to a certain historical personages is a hypothesis unconfirmed by the experience of history. The theory of the transference of the collective will of the people to historical persons may perhaps explain much in the domain of jurisprudence and be essential for its purposes, but in its application to history, as well as revolutions, conquests, or civil wars occur, that is, as soon as the history begins, then theory explains nothing. He's very sharp and Tolstoy, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
The theory seems irrefutable, just because the act of transference of the people's will cannot be verified, for it never occurred. I'm gonna read it. In my understanding, he's a tune. He's very argumentative, actually. So, whatever happens and whatever may stand at the head of the affairs, the theory can always say that such a person took the lead because the collective will was transferred to him. That's more like a tune, right? I'm dramatizing for you here. You think about Tolstoy, make a speech like that.
Well, I know from just reading about his life, I know that whenever he did have conversations with people, he was pretty animated.
He's animated. You can imagine that, yeah.
Yeah.
The reply this theory gives to historical equations are like the replies of man. Remember Pierre in the war and the Peace, that is like Pierre, I guess.
Yeah.
Watching the movements of a herd of cattle, paying no attention to the varying qualities of pasturage in different parts of the field, or to the driving the herdsman should attribute the direction the herd takes to what animal happened to be at its head. The herd goes in that direction because the animal in front leads it, and the collective will of all the other animals is vested in that leader. That's what the historians of the first class say. Those who assume the unconditional transference of the people's will. If the animal is leading, that's a very good parable. I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, he's pretty much a metaphor master.
Yeah.
I've always thought so.
Yeah, I think so. If the animals leading the herd change, this happens because the collective will of all the animals is transferred from one leader to another, according to whether the animals or is not leading them in direction selected by the whole herd. Such is the reply historians who assume that the collective will of the people is delegated to rulers under conditions which they regard as known. With this method of observation often happens that the observer, influenced by the direction he himself prefers, regard those as the leaders who, owing to the people change their direction, are no longer in front, but on one side, or even in the rear. If the animals in front are continually changing, and the direction of the whole herd constantly altered, this is because, in order to follow a given direction, the animal transfers the will to the animals that has attracted our attention. And to study the movements of the herd, we must watch the movements of all the prominent animals moving on all sides of the herd. So says the third class of historians regard all historical persons from monarchs to journalists as expression of their age. The theory of the transference of the will of the people to historical persons is merely a paraphrase, a restatement of the question. In other words, what causes historical events? Power? What is power? Power is the collective will of the people transferred to one person. Under what condition is the will of the people delegated to one person? On condition that the person expresses the will of the whole people. That is, power is power. In other words, power is a word, the meaning which we don't understand. If the realm of human knowledge were confined to abstract reasoning, then having subject to criticism the explanation power that is juridical, I'm sorry, that's a difficult word. Juridical science gives us, humanity would conclude that power is merely a word and has no real existence. What ridiculousness. Sorry. But to understand the phenomena man has, besides abstract reasoning, experience by which he verifies his reflections, and experience tells us that power is not merely a word, but an actual existing phenomenon. Not to speak of the fact that there's no description of the collective activity man can do without the conception power. The existing power is proved both by history and by observing contemporary events. Whenever an event occurs, a man appears or men will appear, by whose will the event seems to have taken place. Napoleon III issues a decree, and the French go to Mexico. The King of Prussia, Bismarck issued decrees that the army entered Bohemia. Napoleon first issued a decree and the army entered Russia. Alexander I gave a command that the French submit to the Bourbons. Experience shows us that whatever events occurs, it is always related to the will of one or for several men who have decreed it. The historians, in accord with the old habit of acknowledging divine intervention in human affairs, want to see the cause of events in the expression of the will of someone endowed with power. But then the supposition is not confirmed, either by reason or by experience. On the one side, reflection shows that the expression of a man's will, his words, are only part of the general activity expressed in an event, as for instance in a war or in a revolution. And so without assuming an incomprehensible supernatural force, a miracle, one can admit that words can be immediate cause of the movements of millions of men. On the other hand, even if we admit that words could be the cause of events, history shows that the express the will of historical personages does not in most cases produce any effect. That is to say, their commands are often not executed, and sometimes the very opposite was the order occurred. He was talking about the war in time under the leadership of Khrushchev. What is the general? The old man who just let things be, basically. So
I'm not sure who you're talking about.
in War and Peace, there's a general Alexander don't like, but he has to use it. You know.
Oh, you're talking about what's his name?
Khrushchev. I forgot his name. So
he's
he was leading the war against Napoleon, chased Napoleon away from Russia. So anyway,
I really want to remember his name.
Yeah, we're in together. He was talking about him basically, you know. So yeah, Prince Andrew was his assistant. You know, remember that? You know, so.
Man, I'm so upset I can't remember his name.
Me too. I like that old man.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, it's Kutuzov.
Kutuzov. Yeah. So I'm not far away. So, sorry, Kutuzov. Yeah. Okay. Let's go on. Without meeting divine intervention in the affairs of humanity, we can regard power as a cause of events. Power, from the standpoint of experience, is merely the relation that exists between the expression of someone's will and the execution of that will by others. To explain the conditions of that relationship, we must first establish conception as expression of will, referring to man and not to the deity. If the deity issues a command expresses will, as ancient history tells us, the expression of that will is independent of time, but is not caused by anything, for the divinity is not controlled by the event. I guess Tolstoy never heard of God, so that's the point. Sorry. I mean, or, he don't understand God can produce a human personage, am I? So to carry out his will, don't even acknowledge him. I mean, acknowledge God. So, but there are many ways, man feel like have destiny. Am I like Lincoln, am I? So like Washington, making sense to you? They all feel something was given to them to carry some kind of destiny, So, yeah, I'm generally talking, okay? So, but Tolstoy write that totally off, So,
I don't think he's not taking into account
that
understanding of history. He's really generalizing it.
Yeah, like generalizing. Okay.
I think he is almost speaking closer to the spectrum of like the I guess what he would consider the Christian God, but at the same time, there's explanations of history, especially as he mentions that ancient history or ancient historians always take into account the divine will being expressed through selected.
Well, I understand the generalization of for certain things, but there are things very peculiar. God tell David how to attack. So David sought God for clear answers, called Urim and Samim. Those are very direct interventions of God, in a sense, interact with a particular person, making sense to you, eventually change the course of the nation. My point is that in all this historical argument back and forth, even Tolstoy was rooted in this the God become a distant idea, become a one of the theories almost. It's not real anymore, So if it's real, it's like a theism. You know what theism means, right? So somebody set up the clock later on, but never, interfere anymore. So
theism, yeah.
Yeah, he's not in the middle of the events in a sense, making sense to you, So that's not true. So
yeah.
That's exactly the opposite of what I observed, which I, in the beginning, talking the history, proposed to you. My understanding of history is God intervenes always through his remnant people. It's a common people thinking they are the entity and the vehicle for history. Therefore, they misunderstand how things getting down, in a sense. Making sense to you? History is, again, Tolstoy criticized right. I think it's thinking the leaders or the study for the will of the mass or the public, whatever. They are pragmatic. They for sure are pragmatic because they are not the vehicles. God really uses. Even the let's see, they're not the direct vessel God uses. They're not the chosen ones. The other vehicles unconsciously being used, maybe. You understand my point, so I don't know how to explain to you, okay? So, it's like God want to carry for certain people like a Noah, Asian Noah, okay? So, it was all the land, it was the ocean, right? You would think it's a flood only, actually it's the ocean, right? Totally worst ocean you can get, so in terms of traveling. And so the history people said that's impossible for Noah to know where he's getting, for impossible Noah know why he prepared the ark, stuff like that, so the truth of the matter, God said, well, all other human beings doesn't matter really to me, only this 8 people in the boat, they don't know where they're heading, but that's the one I'm going to work everything accordingly. Am I? To the things that I will do with their life or do through their life. So in that light, if you pair together, say the one getting drunk or whatever, even a good man, right? You understand? Even a friend, no. Let's see. I'm talking about the Asian no, not you. Okay, so and so the human mind gonna come in the moment. Is why he's a friend? He's a good man. Why? You know all this foolish argument, the whining I called. Said why God is not fair? Why don't treat equal? Why? All those kind of reasonings, you know. Hold on a minute. So, you know, I don't reason like you, you know, so I don't think like you know, so your humanity, you choose to be on the wrong side with me. You understand my point, you know, so I don't do things because of what you think is right or wrong. That's a historical problem. I think in here, Tolstoy has the same problem. He think, literally think God has to follow his reason, his logic, his observation, to do things. The truth of the matter, nations is or nation affairs, as much as tragic or eventful, epic it is, it means nothing to him. It means, you know, it's Nebuchadnezzar have better wisdom than Tolstoy in this matter, you know. So sorry to see that, but that's the fallacy for academic approach, because we believe through the multitude theories and refuting or agreeing or developing different reasonings, we can have better touch of reality. The truth of the matter, you just lost in the ocean. Well, one revelation from God, one touch from God, like he did to David, like this morning read from Abraham, you know, he did to me. I can personally testify, you know, how much that have weight on anybody else. That just, really is not the point. I'm saying I'm convinced because I know, he intervened, he showed me. So in a sense that you don't need to speculate how history worked out anymore. You may not be able to write a good book, make a good presentation, or not even, you literally with that, because at a standing point, you pretty much feel uncomfortable with certain thing being dialogued. You understand my point or presented, because it's not right, so it's not right. You understand my point, So, anyway, I've just asked God to give you that kind of certainty, if you will, and the stability in your heart. Not be fascinated by wonderful people. I'm Tolstoy is such a beautiful personality, so I really like him. But I don't like his mind, and his mind, can drive you crazy. So, sorry, he's a good man,
Well, I've always known, even through
Yeah,
reading this book, because I think it was really good for me to have read his biography
yeah,
before I read any of his works, because I know I had a foreknowledge in approaching this book that he actually criticized in his later years. He criticized War and Peace and wish he hadn't written it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
he said people should not be reading this book, basically.
Oh, that right. It's
And,
a bit confusing, yeah. So, yeah.
sometimes his wife would sneak copies of War and Peace into some of his quote unquote disciples' bags before they left his house, or something like that, because she still believed in the literary importance of War and Peace, but
Sure.
he criticized it. He didn't have really anything to do with
I
it.
think she's one of the girls in the World of Peace story, maybe. So who knows? So
Yeah.
Natasha, maybe. So who knows?
Actually, I think his wife was a closer representation of Sonia.
Sonia.
Sorry,
Sonia. That's right.
I forget what. Yeah, I think it was Sonia.
Nicholas's wife. Yeah. Nicholas lover or whatever. In the beginning.
His wife's younger sister was actually Natasha.
Is that right? I had no idea now.
Interestingly.
Yeah.
Funny.
Is that right? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Anyway, we're just chatting here. You know, I'm gonna stop repeatedly without much context, maybe without good reason to blur something out, just understand, and I'll try to criticize it. But this sometimes I read it like this lengthy argument there. I said, wow, this missed the whole point. So, you understand my point, you know? So
I wouldn't be surprised at all if his misgivings concerning his earlier work here had to do actually with his perspective of God as expressed in the second epilogue here, because his perspective of his spiritual life changed drastically
after a while. Okay, yeah.
So it may have really not made him very happy to see how he had written things here.
Yeah,
here
well,
as it concerns the explanation of
an inspired mind. You just don't do argument, you know. It's no, and right, intuitive know something. Also, you just don't. You just don't know, you know. You understand? I lay the case, but don't prove. You don't try to prove a point, you know. No, am I? You understand my point, you know. So you just don't have appetite to do that because you have a. Maybe people have divine revelations. They don't need to rely on the meandering of different opinion to figure out what is the right choice, especially in topic like the meaning of a soul, the meaning of a heart, and the meaning of a history. You know, those are not the small topic. You understand my point? You don't know, you don't know. You know. So anyway, I'm just talking. So go ahead.
But I don't have anything.
I want you to read on. So yeah, finish.
Oh, where were we? We were in.
I think if the deity issued a command.
Sure.
You know, this is totally denied. Deity issued command in many occasions. He issued command. He tells certain man to do certain things, and right in the Bible is full of it. So go ahead.
Yeah.
However, he does not tell Louis XIV to do. That's a weak in the man. You know, it's a vessel in hell. You know, in the sense of what I do with God. So you know, to try to make a linkage between these two and God and with Louis XIV. God has no regard for Louis XIV. You know, he may use him in certain ways because he's a certain personality in a certain position in the culture, in the nation, politics, whatever. You know, that's my point, you know. So, but would God tell, I mean, he does tell weak character to do certain things, you know. So, but to say Louis XIV is the obedient soul to obey God's purposes, that's a ridiculous proposition to start with. You see my point, you know. So yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
If the deity issues a command.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. I heard John came around. So go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Expresses his will, as ancient history tells us. The expression of that will is independent of time.
You want to attend my class? Come in. Sit down here. Yeah.
I'm gonna sit out here.
5 minutes will be good,
Okay,
bro.
no
Yes.
problem.
Yeah. Go ahead.
As ancient history tells us, the expression of that will is independent of time and is not caused by anything, for the divinity is not controlled by an event. But speaking of commands that are the expression of the will of men, acting in time and in relation to one another, to explain the connection of commands with events, we must restore, number one, the condition of all that takes place, the continuity of movement and time, both of the events and of the person who commands, and number two, the inevitability of the connection between the person commanding and those who execute his command.
I found the Tolstoy is a very interesting person. Oh, man. Sorry, I never read this book before. This is found this very interesting. So I hope I really like your age, you know. So I love to think about it, you know. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't read his essays, you know, that much. So didn't have a chance to have access to it when back in China, you know, stuff like that. So yeah. Well, no preference, right? Perhaps don't think I adopt any opinion about those things. Just enjoy reading. The topic is a little sensitive to me because you know, God show you something, you just can't when things seems maybe so contrary. So I let it out there, making sense to you, you know. So especially the topic, you know, it's not true, you know. So I'm sorry. it evokes some uncomfortability. I don't want it to sound that I'm overcritical or cynical about things. Okay, so yeah. But I absolutely does not have with that intellectual arguments. I'm so tired of it. There's always evoke to me in me a natural what is the word? It's repulsiveness. So I mean, what are you arguing about? Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. I just try to explain to you my tunes. So don't be influenced by it. Okay. So
Yeah.
Don't influence. Enjoy the reading. So it's a good book. Read that. Right? So, go ahead. Yeah.
Lord, we do. Lord, thank you for, Lord, your insight and Lord, and understanding concerning the world around us, Lord, and even the past. Lord, truly it is as with many, Lord, things that concern, Lord, who you are and Lord, what you have done. Lord, they are not complex, Lord, and intellectual things, Lord, that require the ultimate extent of our minds and our intellect, Father, but they are in many ways, Lord, simple truths, Lord, that can be processed and understood by those with hearts of purity, Lord, and desire to know you. And Lord, truly this extends, Lord, into the understanding of many things. Lord, we don't want to get trapped in, Lord, intellectual rabbit holes of thinking, Lord, which has been for thousands of years even, Lord, nothing more than an entertainment for the human mind, Lord, but has unfortunately led many astray, Lord, to think that is how man can reason his explanation of reality, Lord, and to explain the way things are and will be and have been. But Lord, may we not carry such in many ways, a perverse approach to knowledge, Lord, and thereby neglect, Lord, what in many ways, the true purpose of knowledge is, Lord, which is to practice wisdom, Lord, to bring, in many ways, a purpose to that which we learn, Lord, which is not to simply manipulate information, Lord, but to live out truth in our lives, Lord, and make, in many ways, make that truth more than an idea, Lord, but make it something real.
Amen.
Lord, so I don't want to speak in too general or esoteric terms, but
no, that's
Lord,
good prayer, and it's wonderful prayer. It's prayer reflecting your true grasp of the subject, the approach, so and the vision you have, or standard rather, method. You study something, you gotta have method. So I mean, if God didn't inspire us, we try to learn to acquire some standard or method. If God already give to us, we know it is. It would be foolish not use that standard measure things, right? Use a method to process things. Making sense to you, so.
Yeah, I wanna read something super short that I wrote yesterday.
Okay.
It's like only a few sentences, but it's going right along with what I was just saying, actually. So I said, just a thought I had. I said, I acquire knowledge in order to better understand what I read, not to merely memorize facts and apply or recall them when the moment presents itself. And I read in order to make sense of these facts, to recognize their relevance in a greater framework of understanding. And I seek to understand that I might then speak, act, and think with an inspired and informed wisdom.
Well, there you go.
The destiny of knowledge is wisdom, not merely intelligence.
Yes.
Resourceful and insightful use or manipulation of knowledge or intelligence still in itself requires direction, purpose, and consistency to a greater idea. Just a better understanding of why knowledge is acquired. It's not simply to use it resourcefully, in a sense.
That's beautiful.
It has to be done with a purpose, I guess.
There you go. Now you have your method. I'm teasing you there, but that's true, am I? It's wonderful. You should congratulate yourself a little bit. I feel proud of you, a young man of your age, able to have such approaching things. That's confident approaching things.
Yeah.
You know, and many are scared or even don't know why they do what they do. You know, so I'll mention.
Right.
I will go on settlement. Well, bless you, Noah. I'm super encouraged. Thank you for sharing that with me. Yeah.
Of course.
Let's. John is waiting. He brought my lunch, so I'm waiting to meet with him. So bless you. Okay, we'll talk more. Yeah.
All right. Am I picking you up at 9:30 tomorrow?
Yes. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
See you then.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Bye.
Oh, did I not stop recording? Man, let's see.